Hello and welcome back to Massalia Tales. On the last episode we saw Eusebios take Patavium from the Għ�ṭη, however the disorder caused by this led to a slave uprising. This threatened all of our holdings in Mediolanum, but luckily for us the uprising occurred right next to Patavium, so the Daemons of Polymus could march out to challenge them right away before they could do too much harm. The enemy had a pretty well commanded force and set up a competent defensive formation to receive us. However, they chose to throw away whatever defender's advantage they had to come and attack our position as we advanced. Because we had numerical advantage, we were able to surround them and quite easily destroy their medium strength units, crushing the slave revolt. But Patavium was still in trouble because we had the Nori raiding on the border and we couldn't do anything about it because their position was so heavily reinforced. So I fell back to try and come up with a plan to try and deal with this situation, but it turns out I didn't have to because both of those stacks decided to come and attack the Daemons of Polymus just outside Patavium. So now Eusebios is going to have to fight a very difficult looking battle against a massive enemy force, which as you can see from the balance bar clearly has an advantage, but we definitely can't lose this or it's all over. The rapid rise and fall of Samius' uprising had left the economy in tatters. Insufficient food left the population on the edge of another uprising, and the stomachs of the all-important Daemons of Polymus empty. Just as the first of them began to fall from hunger, the Nori struck west with a host more than double their size, taking control of most of the remaining farmsteads in the region. Eusebius knew that he had to destroy this invasion to have any hope of a stable Cisalpina, and that the only thing that could bring victory against those odds was to rely on the desperation of his men. So here is Eusebius and the Daemons of Polymus making a stand on the tiny bit of high ground on an otherwise very flat open plain near Patavium. On the way to reinforce his position is the garrison from Patavium, a very small force, also moving very slowly, which is going to gradually inch its way towards Eusebius. In the meantime, the enemy army was just standing still, their vanguard army was at least, because they were waiting for their huge reinforcement army to come and join them. They have 2 stacks total here, the same sort of force that has defeated the Daemons before when they fought under Xenon, under quite similar circumstances as well, because again here Eusebius isn't quite at full strength as a result of attrition and previous battles, so we are going to have to be careful and fight very hard to win. So you can see the formation I've set up is pretty basic, archers in front and then a heavy infantry line with a few light infantry units behind it. Once the garrison units arrived, I put them on an echelon on my right flank because the enemy look like they're going to go around to that side from their current formation, and I'm using a pike phalanx to join up the garrison and the main lines and basically form an impenetrable wall there. On the left flank I'm forming up with some light spears and swords who should be able to go and assault the enemy, putting the spears in front because the enemy does have heavy cavalry coming in on the right flank. As for the enemy's formation, you can see they have this sub-line of spears behind their main line. Their main line is pretty much a double line formation. The front is an endless sea of swordsmen of varying quality. They have light, medium and heavy swordsmen scattered about in this huge line, and the second line are a load of javelinmen, slingers and archers coming up to support them. And as we get towards the end of this main line, you can see they have another reinforcement line of spears coming in. So they've kept most of their spears in slightly behind their main line, as if they're going to use them as reserves. You can see the main problem from the strategic situation is the enemy's formation is way wider than ours. And you can see especially on my right, it looks like it's going to outflank me. But luckily my high ground is right on the edge of the map, so the red line of death means I can't be completely outflanked. Normally I would not wish to use that exploit against the enemy, but I'm also not willing to give up high ground just in order to be sporting, so I am going to take both advantages and stay where I am as the enemy advances. So once they get close, my archers can begin to hit them with a few arrows, begin the battle in earnest. Probably not going to do all that much at this stage because the enemy all have heavy shields apart from some of their lighter swordsmen who will actually be able to be killed by these arrows, but I don't know if my guys are really firing at them. the enemy go into a full charge and start to engage my line. Most of their forces right at the start of the battle actually charge towards my garrison units here. This is a good decision, of course, because that's the weakest part of the line. It's very thin, and some of them are only militia units who in theory can't hold against this heavy charge the enemy are putting on. So here they come, rushing in to attack my men, hitting me with javelins in some cases beforehand. These guys here charge onto the pike phalanx and not going to have a very good time. They're only a medium sword unit. The pikes will defeat them. As well here, the enemy are attacking with light swords against my hoplite phalanx. They won't be able to get through, but of course they have plenty more men to come in after that. Again, light swords attacking near the center. Very willing to let that happen, especially because once they get locked in place, my archers will do extreme damage to them. And here more medium guys coming in to engage the phalanx. Overall, they essentially made a light attack with their swords against the phalanx to begin with, whilst the rest of their army seemed to sit in reserve as it very slowly moved up. They've kept more than half of their army out of the battle to begin with. You can see they're basically forming up, especially on the left flank, where they have about 10 regiments in reserve who could easily outflank me if it wasn't for the red line of death. But at the moment they're just standing there whilst the fight goes on in the center. So my men are going to have to start a very long fight holding this position. I wanted to wait for the enemy to commit all of their men into the battle before I really did anything. You can see now they're doing that, rushing all of their troops to engage. The only situation that is actually good for us is right here, where the enemy's light swordsmen have not been reinforced, which means my hoplites who are fighting them should be able to defeat them and then possibly push out if the enemy doesn't attempt to plug the gap. Helping that is the fact that arrows are raining down, and these light swordsmen who have absolutely no armor are being heavily depleted by those arrows. But unfortunately the enemy just rush in some spears to fill the gaps being caused by those naked swordsmen falling. So the centre is going to hold for now. Meanwhile on my right flank the enemy are rushing in everything they have, which is what I expected them to do I guess, since they can't go around. They're just going to put loads of pressure on my front line. Kind of annoying because this front line is pretty thin and some of them, as I said, are just militia units. This could be dangerous. You can see the enemy have already actually come around my flank because I didn't perfectly extend over to the red line of death. I do have this unit stopping the enemy go completely past my lines, but they can attack my echelon there on the flank if they want. So overall, a dangerous situation. The only good side about this whole battle right now is that the enemy haven't engaged my left echelon, which is exactly what they wanted to happen. The enemy are committing all of their reserves on this side to just come and attack the edge of the main line. You can see they've got all sorts of different units just piling into this engagement with the hoplite phalanx, which is really fine because all the guys standing at the back are being wasted. They're not doing anything, they're just waiting for their turn to fight. So now that they're just standing there, they're not going to be able to react to me bringing units around the back. So my left echelon could have a chance to do that very soon, although the only way that's going to work is if the enemy don't destroy my right flank in the meantime. You can see they're doing a pretty good job of pushing through all sorts of different classes of units all working together against my men. Luckily the cavalry won't do very well since it's all spears holding my side. However, they've yet to deploy their best units. They're just coming in, these very heavy spears, phalanxes, which far outnumber my own hoplites in the area. That's going to get very dangerous. I'm sure you've already seen how the council is too busy with bluster to actually rule our new charges. I doubt most of them even know about it. They have their heads shoved somewhere the news of the world tends not to reach. And so you see, it is very important that in order to maintain and build upon this new seed of a realm, we construct for ourselves the infrastructure needed to do so. That is the ₕₘᵒ. The city can keep their council, but the republic needs leaders with power, resolve, and good birth. I know you and Melanthios are going through a lover's tiff, but I'd seriously propose you think about his offer. So now that the enemy have committed pretty much all of their men to the fight, it's time to start moving out on my left flank to come and surround the enemy. You can see they came in with one of their own hoplite phalanxes, and I tried to lock them down by just hitting them with tons of javelins, but it did absolutely nothing. Even the guy with a tiny shield managed to stop them all. So they continue to edge up, and now they're going to engage with my medium spears, which won't go too well, but I have to have them there just to lock them down so my swords can get out of the area. Meanwhile, the hoplites at the end of the line are still holding pretty well against the enemy's massive onslaught, especially because the front of their ranks is all their light swordsmen who the hoplites will have an okay time against. Now here in the centre, where I was fighting those light swordsmen earlier, a similar situation has occurred where it's a mix of light and medium swords who are all fighting against two hoplite units, with no units on either side really supporting them. So if I can break through there, I'll have an opportunity to move those hoplites forwards to get involved in these fights happening on the flanks. Although, as we said earlier, these flanks need to hold for me to do any strategy against them, and they are under enormous pressure, especially where it's the militia fighting. Of course, shouldn't really be expected to hold against these massive enemy hordes. The enemy aren't doing themselves any favours though, because they are pushing cavalry into my spears, and here they're pushing infantry into a pike phalanx and cavalry into the pike phalanx, which is holding very well. Even though they do have a lot of missile units, they weren't focusing on this pike phalanx, which they could have done to break through it. So it was having a pretty good time defeating many enemies and stopping them from getting through and being able to ravage both our archers and either side of the hoplite lines. So there in the centre where I was fighting those light swordsmen, I pulled in my swords from the left echelon to come and attack them, but just as they arrived they were actually defeated anyway by the hoplites combining up with the archers behind them. So now there's a big gap in the enemy's line in the centre. We can do something about this because these two hoplite units aren't engaged at all. We can start pushing forwards. Also a unit just to the side routed as well, meaning this part of the battle might just go in our favour, but the enemy are quick to counter-attack. First, cavalry rush in to attack my swordsmen who had attacked the enemy in the rear. The cavalry charge does good damage to my swordsmen, and they won't last very long in melee because the swords are particularly weak against cavalry from my own experience in previous battles. Then they move in one of their hoplite phalanxes to come and lock those swordsmen down. So they're pretty much surrounded now. It's not going to go too well unless I can relieve them with some of my other units. I do now have 3 units, of course. The centre is going to start folding to attack both blocks. The enemy are sort of forming up into 2 big regions now that their centre's gone, so both of my units will be able to go around and attack them in the back. We can look on the tactical map, you can see my vague plan is to surround and destroy this side of the enemy's army, whilst the other side is just going to try and hold against the huge enemy onslaught, which could of course be a challenge because my line is thin. If any part of it breaks, the rest will be in big trouble. And now the enemy's best units, the very heavy spears, are edging forwards towards the front of the battle, pushing my lines back. I've only got medium spears holding against that huge enemy horde. That's not going to hold for very long. I do have Eusebios just behind them, encouraging them and getting in position essentially to fill gaps in the line, which I foresee occurring any moment. But let's not forget that the enemy are going to be taking some moderate casualties as well, throwing themselves against hoplite phalanxes. You can see one unit here has finally been defeated. The units that started engaging right at the start of the battle are by now going to be quite tired and have lost a lot of men from facing the hoplite phalanx. So we're going to start to see some of the early enemy units rout off the field. Something similar happens in the big blob of enemy units on our left. Many of the initial units are going, leaving behind enough to hold my forces in position. And of course those routing units will eventually come back. Essentially they're being immediately replaced by the enemy's reinforcements, so once the regiments at the front are gone, the next regiment steps in to do battle. So I wasn't able to actually gain any space to manoeuvre by defeating these enemies, but we're closer to generally defeating all of the enemies in the area. You can see some of my medium spears who were facing against the enemy's hoplites didn't do very well. I had to pull them out of the battle, and the enemy's hoplites actually didn't pursue them, so now they're just going to have a staring contest. A lot of the enemy's units here start breaking, almost a chain rout is ensuing with some of the enemies stay behind. These units will come back from routing, some of the ones who routed just now are already coming back. So it's not a total victory. It's not going to free up all of these units, which is the key thing. I need to free up units to go and fight in the other main part of the battle. I need to assess how many units I'll need to leave behind essentially to hold off the enemy forces as they come back from routing. I should be able to free up a couple, but they need to get here in time because we're about to break, you can see here. I'm about to lose one of my units facing off against this really dense enemy formation. As a result, I pushed in Eusebios and his guards to try and plug the gap and keep them encouraged, although this of course now means Eusebios is in danger of being killed, and his loss could spell the end for the entire army. You don't want a chain rout to occur, especially because all of the low morale units happen to be in this area. You can see Eusebios himself fighting with his sword, pushing through to the front to get in on the action himself, because he is not the sort of man to miss out on a chance to attempt to fight his way into an enemy horde about 50 men deep with elite training and weapons. So of course he's going to do his thing. We just have to hope that he survives. You can see things are getting quite bad here, so bad that I actually had to commit my javelins to holding the enemy. I lost one of my regiments of spears, but I didn't want the enemy to outflank Eusebios, so the javelin men are now fighting in melee, holding off multiple enemy units. And of course, if they break through, they're going to have access to a lot of my soft units and the backs of the hoplite phalanx. So that's a critical part of the battle we need to try and hold. Luckily, the situation is getting better here on the other side of the battlefield, where we've managed to contain many of the enemy units returning from routing and the ones who never routed in the first place, fighting with a few units that should eventually be able to beat them. So as a result, I can pull units out of that part of the battle to come back. In particular, a unit of swords is going to rush in to replace those javelin men, forming a more steadfast defense in this part of the line, and I've got 2 missile units coming to support them as well. So hopefully that will stop things getting too bad there. Even if the enemy do attempt to break through, we can widen our sword line to hold them off until these guys over here beat the rest of the enemy and come to support them. This battle is like a question being asked by the gods. Do you want to be the masters of your world, of your fate? Or do you want to watch it burn beneath the ill-bred shadow of a people so ruinous that the world will scorn the daemons that let them live until the end of time? Answer this question, mighty warriors, with your mastery of the shield, your dance of the spear, your unstoppable drive of the sword. See that not a single woman back home will hear the news of this day and weep. And if any of you can kill more of them than me, you shall have your face engraved on every coin from here to Alexandria. The return of extra units from the left-hand side of the battlefield coming back to fight here pushes some of the enemy units away. We managed to rout a couple of enemy units, including their general and his cavalry. That's certainly a good move. The enemy's morale can't be doing too well, seeing their general flee from the field before the advance of our reinforcements who are coming around to their rear. We can start surrounding many of these enemy units and hopefully defeat them quite rapidly. We need to defeat them rapidly because Eusebios is having trouble holding on against all of these massive enemy formations that are pushing against him. The javelin men who I had holding the line are fighting surprisingly well against the enemy forces there. They did very well. They're going to be reinforced soon. Meanwhile, back on the left, some of the enemy units are starting to rout. There's really not that many enemies left at the moment, just a few slingers here coming back from routing who are really disrupting my campaign. I'm going to rush these archers forwards to drive them away. This will leave the rest of my units free to resume fighting with the enemies and generally surrounding them. We're starting to gain a numerical advantage. These mercenary spearmen won't do too well attempting to fight with our heavy swords, so I expect to defeat them shortly. We also have a couple of units, including those archers, who I can bring back to surround them to further expedite their loss. Back on the right, some more enemy units are starting to rout as our forces push against them from all sides. The enemy's morale really needs to break at this stage so I can free up units to go and fight against the enemy's phalanx who are fighting Eusebios. They have another phalanx here which I'm currently engaging from all sides, but I can't get it to go down. You can see I attack them from the back with slingers, but the enemy are just completely destroying my slingers. The slingers had no effect on their numbers, although they might have a small effect on the enemy's morale. You can see I'm trying to get my pike phalanx to push through to hit them from the front, because before I've seen the pike phalanx does quite well against those hoplite units. I've also got some units actually freed up from combat now due to recent enemy routes, so I'll be able to do a couple of maneuvers finally. My swordsmen have relieved those javelinmen right on the end of the line. They have themselves been immediately surrounded by the enemy, so they are fighting on their flanks, but they're going to hold pretty well. These guys are almost used to fighting on their flanks because I always fight with them on the end of the line. The guys to the left of Eusebios look like they're going to break. I'm surprised they haven't broken so far. It's just citizen militia who have been holding this entire time. Quite miraculous. Meanwhile, Eusebios is fighting on the front line, still alive somehow, even though he's now lost the majority of his unit. I really need to relieve him, because the loss of Eusebios, as I said earlier, probably won't do well for the flagging morale of the nearby units. Things are going a little better just a tiny bit up the line, where we seem to have defeated many of the enemy units and are now pushing some of our spearmen forward to start engaging the last big remaining enemy blob of troops, or even starting to surround it, or at least attempt to surround it. We've got more units coming back from the other part of the battle as well. As enemy units rout, I need fewer and fewer guys to stay behind here. The ones who are behind are currently facing two enemy hoplite regiments, one with a lot of strength, one not much strength. It's about to rout. I attack them in the back with some of my medium spears, and that persuades them to break, so we'll now finish them off. They won't last too long, completely surrounded like this and being stabbed out frantically by the medium spears. So now we've got rid of them. It's just this big block here, which for some reason wasn't even fighting forwards against the unit it was engaging, so we already had somewhat of an advantage against it. And now we're going to do a massive rear attack with all of our local forces. The enemy don't break. This is an elite unit, fairly well trained as well, so they don't mind fighting completely surrounded, but my numerical advantage there will mean eventually I should be able to defeat them and I can just forget about that part of the battle. For now, we're going to keep attempting to push forwards here. We've got another ₕₕᵒ unit which has almost been defeated, facing my own ₕₕᵒs. I've got more enemy units beginning to fall back as my pike phalanx leads the charge with spears on either side, pushing the enemy back, and more ₕₕᵒs here coming around to the back of the enemy's formation, ready to attack them in the rear. The sword unit that came from the left side of the battlefield isn't going to actually engage the enemy, it's just going to chase off all of the enemy's skirmishers, some of which were coming back from routing, because these skirmishers here are going to be now able to fight into the back of my units that I'm using to surround the enemy. So it's very important to get rid of those guys as soon as possible, because they can do a lot of damage. Eusebios is still holding on, holding his part of the line despite heavy casualties, but finally I was able to relieve him, pulling in a unit of ₕₕᵒs from further up the line, which had been freed up fighting enemy spearmen. So now Eusebios has the chance to pull back. You can see he actually did pull back to the back of his own regiment temporarily, not fighting at the front, so his risk of being killed was reduced towards the end there, so I'm going to cycle him back in a moment. Meanwhile, the enemy skirmishers are still threatening me because my swords got bogged down fighting with these enemy axemen who came back from routing. The archers I sent to chase off the enemy skirmishers have the same problem. They get attracted into this fight with the axemen, which of course won't go very well, and they're going to be taking missile fire while they're doing it, so I actually lose quite a few archers in that little engagement there. The good news is that my pike phalanx is now behind the enemy's formation, so I can push into them with the deadly advance of pikes. And more good news, Eusebius' unit has finally disengaged and been replaced by a regular ₕₕᵒs, almost routing in the process. They really were on the edge of defeat. And luckily you can see Eusebius is still alive, a little tired looking, although not as tired as some of his guards. They probably get annoyed following Eusebius around because he makes them fight very hard. So finally they're disengaging, and now we're just going to grind against the enemy's units. We've got many of them surrounded. It's up to the skill of our troops to attempt to defeat them. The balance bar has finally evened up by this part of the fight, so this is our chance to defeat them if we can just break up a couple more enemy units and be able to surround even more of them and perhaps cause a chain rout. Out here you can see my skirmishers were able to catch up with the enemy skirmishers, although the enemy probably have an advantage in melee. We have more men, especially because I have another unit of skirmishers on the way to support my archers fighting against these enemy slingers. You can see some of my line looks like they're about to go. It's only the medium spears. The loss of them isn't too bad because I've got ₕₕᵒs right behind them. The main problem is all of the enemy's very heavy spears, so we just can't defeat. They're still posing a big threat, a big immovable block in the middle of the enemy's line. My only hope is to get them to rout, and helping with that is the pike phalanx engaging the enemy from behind. Their formation is slightly broken up as an enemy unit routes into their flank. Many of them rout right across the face of the pike phalanx, so they'll be able to get some nice kills there. But all those routers are going to be reducing the morale of the remaining heavy troops. The skirmisher I mentioned going to reinforce the skirmish fight going on the edge of the map are rushing their way now. The enemy's axemen get surrounded by my archers and swordsmen, and they rout, and suddenly a chain rout occurs. The rest of the enemy's very heavy spears discontinue the fight. Suddenly a victory comes out of nowhere. The enemy forces will now attempt to escape, but they're really surrounded. A large number of them will be killed as they attempt to leave. You can see Eusebius' forces now jubilant as victory is finally ours. It looked like it would not occur, especially early on in the battle. The enemy's advantage was huge, and of course those among the daemons who know their history will have remembered how they were defeated in a very similar situation in the past. You can see the field is absolutely covered in enemy bodies and our own. The enemies were definitely worse off than us in the end, although you can see we have many depleted units wandering the battlefield now, just walking very slowly after the enemy. Many of them are exhausted and not really able to chase the enemy down. The enemy though are moving really slowly and really going to be slaughtered as we completely surround their path of rout. It's a close victory for Eusebius' forces in the end. We were able to hold off this Nori invasion. Not only will we hold Batavium, but now all of Cisalpina, and perhaps in a few turns we'll be able to counterattack before the enemy can regain their strength. We'll see next time.
While it was the daemons of Polymus who claimed victory, the most remarkable detail of the battle are the accounts speaking of the action on the right flank. There the line consisted mainly of hastily mustered pro-Greek citizens from Batavium, some not even knowing the names of the heavy round shields they were carrying. This brigade of local fighters faced the heaviest of the Nori forces and were the first to engage the enemy, fighting until the very end without buckling despite a harrowing disadvantage in numbers and training. Few of these men survived, but their sacrifice likely brought Eusebius his now famous victory.